This presentation provides an introduction to locating and evaluating evidence-based practices in special education. One assumption that underlies this presentation is the idea that teachers want their students to achieve success in school and life. One factor that propels effective teaching is federal legislation. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, Subchapter 2, Part B, Section 1414 requires a statement of the special education and related services and supplementary aids based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable to be provided to the child or on behalf of the child, and a statement of the program modifications or supports for school personnel that will be provided for the child to advance appropriately toward attaining the annual goals on the Individualized Education Plan or IEP. Basing a child's individualized education program on peer-reviewed research is how we confer a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. Case law, specifically the Andrew versus Douglas case, has established that a school must offer an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstance. The 2017 ruling used the term progress appropriate. That means that we need to implement evidence-based practices and collect ongoing data to ensure that the child is on pace to meet the IEP goals within the 12-month period. With respect to this progress appropriate requirement, the contents of this presentation are intended to answer three questions. First, what does evidence-based practice mean? Second, where can I find evidence-based practices? And third, how can I make decisions about what to try using with the students in my setting? Let's begin with a definition of the descriptor evidence-based practice. An evidence-based practice lies at the intersection of several concepts: a person's own experience, practitioner experience, and the best available research evidence. Now let's break this down further by specifically looking at the descriptor evidence-based. For a practice to be considered evidence-based, it needs to demonstrate four characteristics. First, it has to have been evaluated through methodologically sound research. Second, the practice has to have been studied at multiple points in time by multiple research teams in multiple geographic locations. In other words, the study and its effects must be replicated. Third, research teams have to show that the practice is linked to positive outcomes, and they must use high-quality data analysis procedures to demonstrate these effects. Finally, reports of methodologically sound research that contain high-quality data analysis must be carefully reviewed and critiqued by experts through a blind peer review process. Let's pause for a moment to ponder how this connects to what we know and do with our students. Have you ever noticed that teachers tend to use the practices and strategies that they have seen others use? One indicator of this is the 165,000 followers of teachers on Pinterest. How often have you stopped to question whether some of these practices or strategies are supported by evidence of a positive effect? Have you ever questioned, for example, did copying that definition from a dictionary really enhance my vocabulary? Did having students each take a turn reading aloud from a text paragraph by paragraph really improve fluency and comprehension? Is the Jeopardy review game the best way to prepare students for an exam? And the next slide, I'll share some examples of practices that lack robust evidence or that show evidence of a negative effect. One example of a practice that has been linked to negative outcomes is the enforcement of zero tolerance policies. Zero tolerance and associated disciplinary practices are not only ineffective, but are associated with negative outcomes, such as the perpetuation of disproportionate representation of students in special education, and the continuation of a school-to-prison pipeline. A second practice that's linked to adverse outcomes is popcorn reading or round-robin reading. This practice offers one shot at orally reading for a brief segment of time. This is not consistent with practices for promoting reading fluency development. It's also noted to cause anxiety or embarrassment, and finally, it's been shown to reduce comprehension as students who are not having a turn reading check out or focus only on rehearsing their anticipated segment of text. I will link on Canvas a video clip to further support the idea of teachers being critical consumers of research. And on Canvas, I'll add timestamps where I'll recommend starting at minute 13:27 and watching through minute 15 and 42 seconds. Let's think about the term evidence-based practice and use a word bank to complete each statement to show what an evidence-based practice is. The word bank includes data analysis, methodologically sound, replication, and peer review. Sentence 1, a practice that has been evaluated through blank research. A practice that has been studied at multiple points in time by multiple research teams in multiple geographic locations. In other words, research teams demonstrate blank of effects. The practice is linked to positive outcomes, and researchers used high-quality blank procedures to demonstrate the effects. Reports on the practice have been carefully reviewed and critiqued by experts through a double-blind blank process. The task ahead of us now is to locate and evaluate evidence so that we can then select and implement practices that are likely to lead to improved outcomes for students with disability labels. There are several paths to take to locate evidence-based practices. Once you've made your choice on a path to take, how will you find your way through reading and evaluating whatever evidence you locate? This presentation intends to guide you in taking any of 3 possible pathways. These pathways can help you locate evidence-based practices. First, professional organizations offer resources we can access freely to find evidence-based practices. In the field of special education or exceptional education, there are several professional organizations. One of the most prominent is the Council for Exceptional Children, or CEC. This presentation gives resources for 4 of several divisions within CEC. The 4 we will visit in this presentation are the Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders, CCBD, the Division for Learning Disabilities, DLD, the Division for Communicative Disabilities and Deafness, DCD, and the Division on Autism and Developmental Disabilities, DADD, often referred to as DAD. Another professional organization that offers resources which may be helpful for locating, selecting, and implementing evidence-based practices is the Council for Learning Disabilities, or CLD. It's easy to locate the resources housed on the websites of these organizations. This slide lists direct URLs which can be accessed without a paid membership. First, the Council for Exceptional Children's Division for Learning Disabilities offers current practice alerts for an array of topics. The alerts are succinctly written and answer questions such as what is the practice, how adequate is the research base, for whom is the practice intended, and how practical or easy to implement is it. 2 categories exist, a green go for it and a yellow use caution category. The DADD division of CEC has a latest practitioner resources space on its website. The quality of available resources the quantity is lacking, but the quality is commendable. At present, you can learn about PECS, or Picture Exchange Communication Systems, and embedded instruction here. The Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders website offers free modules on an array of topics. Modules include text and caption videos that demonstrate practices. You may have to register using an email address to access the modules. However, there's no fee associated with accessing the modules, at least of October 28th of this year. The Division for Language and Communication Disorders and Deaf of Hard of Hearing Students offers a small number of resources to guide teachers of individuals who are deaf or who have hearing impairments. And finally, the Council for Learning Disabilities offers guidance on how to implement effective practices across a range of topics. Websites are in the process of expanding and developing the support that they offer to teachers who envision themselves consumers of research. A richer selection of resources is available through practitioner-friendly journals published by the aforementioned professional organizations. Teaching Exceptional Children is a journal published by the Council for Exceptional Children. The Council for Learning Disabilities publishes Intervention in School and Clinic, and Preventing School Failure is an independent, practitioner-friendly journal published by the Youth Policy Group through Taylor and Francis. In our library databases, you can do keyword searches and select journal title as a source. You can type directly in the name of the journal, like Teaching Exceptional Children, and add additional search terms to categorize the practice or content area that you're specifically focusing on, maybe reading fluency, reading comprehension, math problem solving, self-monitoring, self-regulation, an area of interest in an area that connects to the student's disability-related need can be entered as a search term to yield results where you'll be able to access either direct PDF copies of the relevant article, or you'll be taken to a link where you can access the electronic form of the website and or possibly make a request through interlibrary loan in order to have that article sent to your email. So the results that you generate through a database search using the UW library system can take you directly to peer-reviewed published research. Another option is to visit the IRIS Center. That's a website that holds a collection of evidence-based practices related to students in special education. The IRIS Center is connected with Vanderbilt University, and the most direct way that I use to get there is just typing into a Google search bar IRIS modules, and then I select the hit that comes up called IRIS using modules and case study resources. When you hit that link in the left-hand panel, the second text box contains the word evidence-based practice summaries. If you click on that box, you'll generate a list of practice summaries coded by category that simplifies your search process. For example, if you want to find out about reading fluency instruction, the Reading Language Arts tab is a good place to start. When I clicked on Reading and Language Arts, I found a list of summaries on various topics related to reading and language arts. I noticed that read naturally, reciprocal teaching, and repeated reading appear on the list. As I scan across the row, I can learn more about the practice and more about the existing evidence. Read naturally was found to have no discernible effects for English learners or emergent bilingual students. This may mean that more research is needed. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a harmful program per se, but it shouldn't be the only form of language arts instruction for emergent bilingual students at this point. Reciprocal reading is shown to have mixed effects. This means that in some cases there are positive results, in others there are not clear positive outcomes. I would want to click on the View Research Summary link to find out more before I made a decision about whether, when, and how to use reciprocal teaching as a way to support reading comprehension development. Repeated reading has potentially positive effects. No effects were observed on alphabetics, reading fluency, or general reading achievement through this approach. It means I might use it as a way to bolster comprehension, but I would consider other practices as a form of individualized instruction to meet needs in the area of fluency or alphabetics. Another thing I might do is look at the practice alert on the Division for Learning Disabilities. One important point about these IRIS summaries is that they link directly to content on the What Works Clearinghouse website, which is the final pathway that we'll focus on here. At this point, we know that we could use websites from professional organizations. We can look at journals that those professional organizations publish and access those directly through our UW library databases. We know that we can search for evidence-based practice summaries through the IRIS Center. The What Works Clearinghouse offers a search bar where we can find what works by typing in the practice that we have in mind. Second, we can scroll to the home page to the 3 options under quick links, and the first option is to locate intervention reports. In special education, we can use the search bar drop-down menu to select children and youth with disabilities. That would narrow the results pool. In this screenshot, I selected the intervention report on self-regulated strategy development to see that several studies have been conducted and that the overall consensus is potentially positive for use of self-regulated strategy development as a way to teach written expression. So now that we know that we can follow several paths to locate research evidence, how should we evaluate whether a practice is worthy of adopting and implementing with the specific students in our setting? We can turn to professional organizations once again here. For example, the Council for Exceptional Children published a document in 2014 that gives a set of criteria for determining whether evidence in the research is sufficient. The CEC document outlines 8 broad areas: context, setting, participants, interventionist, description of practice, fidelity of implementation, internal validity, outcome measures, data analysis. To condense the ideas purveyed in the CEC document, this slide offers a set of 8 guiding questions. The answer to these questions can help you determine whether to accept evidence or reject it. 1, has the practice been evaluated through peer-reviewed research? So what was the source of the evidence? Who were the study's participants? How similar were their attributes to the students with whom you intend to use this practice? Who implemented the practice in the study? Was it a teacher? Was it a researcher, a research team? That might shed some light onto how feasible it is to actually implement this in your setting. How many days, weeks, months, or years did the evaluation period last? What was the intensity and duration needed for those results to be attained? What assessments or measures were used? How likely are you to replicate those assessment procedures? What kind of validity do those tools hold? And what do the results show? Are those outcomes significant? Are they socially significant? Was anything not described in sufficient detail that would cause you to raise questions and have caution around use of that particular practice or strategy? And can you accept the conclusions that are being drawn in the study's report? So on this slide, I highlight a practice that you can find on What Works Clearinghouse, peer tutoring, and one on shared storybook reading. Let's look at what evidence there is and what decision you might make around using, adapting, or avoiding these practices. I'll search for evidence on peer tutoring by checking the DLD practice alerts to see if there's a go for it or use caution practice write-up. I'll read through the alert to see what peer-reviewed studies are cited. I'll check the Council for Learning Disabilities Research to Practice Corner to see whether I can find guidance on how to implement this practice, and I'll check the Iris Center's evidence-based practice summary, as well as the What Works Clearinghouse for additional information on the quality of the results reported on peer tutoring. So here's screenshots of what I see when I do these investigations to look for evidence about this practice. The DLD practice alert says go for it and gives me information about effectiveness of the practice. Iris Center links information on peer-assisted learning strategies with potentially positive effects in reading and no discernible effects in math at the elementary level. Finally, I can find a peer tutoring intervention report for English learners or emergent bilingual students showing positive effects. Given this evidence where I see methodologically sound peer-reviewed studies conducted across grade levels with students with learning disabilities or students who are emergent bilinguals, I see potentially positive results in reading. The decision I might make is to use peer tutoring for reading instruction when partner matches fit well and when there is time space to rehearse tutoring routines with students. Now I'm going to look at shared storybook reading. I can do a search in our library databases using this keyword search. I've got the journal title, Teaching Exceptional Children, and I'm using shared storybook reading as a search term. I'll also use the IRIS evidence-based practice summaries from the What Works Clearinghouse to see what I can find on shared storybook reading. Doing a dive in the UW databases, I can find some peer-reviewed research on using shared storybook reading to promote emergent literacy. I can also find an intervention report from the What Works Clearinghouse site. Based on the evidence provided in that report, there are mixed effects in some areas and no discernible effects in others. What does this mean? Should we avoid the practice? No. Should this be all that we do to support reading development for students with or at risk for disabilities? No. I can summarize my thinking on this chart and show how I'm being a critical consumer. It doesn't happen without work. It doesn't happen alone. So we can work on this in our own teaching practices, in our own settings, with our course colleagues or with our work colleagues to do kind of investigation that will help us know whether the practices we're adopting have sufficient evidence to help fulfill that expectation that a student would attain their IEP goals